We are back. Is everyone situated and ready to go? I hope so. Just a reminder that during the next hour of the stream, or at least until we finish these next 2 chapters, that all alerts are disabled. So there will not be any gnomes sounds, there will not be any yippies, there will not be any anythings. There won't be any follower notifications either. So if you do send a follow, I really appreciate it, and I will do my best to respond. If I don't in a timely manner, I do apologize. But we are going to be reading J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, and continuing where we left off last time, we left off at reading Chapter 2. So we are going to be starting with Chapter 3, A Short Rest. And like always, I'm probably going to butcher the first page while I get into reading mode. So, I hope everyone's got themselves a tea or a hot cocoa. They've got themselves wrapped in a blanket. They've got themselves situated in a good bed or something to that effect. And I hope you have a good time turning off your brain and listening to this wonderful story. Chapter 3, A Short Rest. They did not sing or tell stories that day, even though the weather improved, nor the next day, nor the day after. They had begun to feel that danger was not far away on either side. They camped under the stars, and their horses had more to eat than they had, for there was plenty of grass, but there was not much in their bags, even with what they had got from the trolls. One morning, they forded a river at a wide, shallow place full... I told you I was going to mess up in the first, 30 seconds. A wide, shallow place... Where am I now? At a wide, shallow place full of the noise of stones and foam. The far bank was steep and slippery. When they got off to the top of it, leading their ponies, they saw that the great mountains had marched down very near to them. Already that they seemed only a day easy... Wow, oh my goodness, I am really messing up this first page. We're doing our best, though, and that's what's important. Already they seemed only a day's easy journey from the feet of the nearest. Dark and dreary it looked, though there were patches of sunlight on its brown sides, and behind its shoulders the tips of snow peaks gleamed. "Is that the mountain?" asked Bilbo in a solemn voice, looking at it with his round eyes. He had never seen a thing that looked so big before. "Of course not," said Balin. "That is only the beginning of the Misty Mountains, and we have got to get through, or over, or under those somehow, before we can come into the wilderlands beyond. And it is a deal of a way even from the other side of them to the Lonely Mountain in the east where Smaug lies on our treasure." "Oh," said Bilbo, and just at that moment he felt more tired than he had ever remembered feeling before. He was thinking once again of his comfortable chair before the fire in his favourite sitting room in his hobbit hole, and of the kettle singing, not for the last time. Now Gandalf led the way. "We must not miss the road, or we shall be done for," he said. "We need food, for one thing, and rest in reasonable safety. Also, it is very necessary to tackle the Misty Mountains by the proper path, or else you will get lost in them, and have to come back to the start at the beginning again, if you ever get back at all." They asked him where he was making for, and he answered, "You are come to the very edge of the wild, as some of you may know. Hidden somewhere ahead of us is the fair valley of Rivendell where Elrond lives, in the last homely house. I sent message by my friends, and we are expected." That sounded nice and comforting, but they had not got there yet, and it was not so easy as it sounds to find the last homely house where the mountains, west of the mountains. There seemed to be no trees and no valleys and no hills to break the ground in front of them, only one vast slope going slowly up and up to meet the feet of the nearest mountain. A wide land, the color of heather and crumbling rock, with patches and slashes of green and moss green, showing where the water might be. Morning passed, Afternoon came, but in all the silent waste there was not a sign of any dwelling. They were growing anxious, for they saw now that the house might be hidden almost anywhere between them and these mountains. They came on unexpected valleys, narrow with steep sides that suddenly opened at their feet, and they looked down, surprised to see below them and running water at the bottom. There were gullies that they could almost leap over, but very deep with waterfalls in them. There were dark ravines that one could neither jump over nor climb into. There were bogs, some of them green, pleasant places to look at, with flowers growing bright and tall, but a pony that walked there with a pack on its back would never have come out again. It was indeed a much wider land from the ford to the mountains than ever you would have guessed. Bilbo was astonished. The only path was marked with white stones, some of which were small, and others were half covered with moss or heather. Altogether, it was a very slow business following the track. Even guided by Gandalf, who seemed to know his way pretty well. His head and beard wagged this way and that, and he looked for the stones. And they followed his lead, but they seemed no nearer to the end of the search when the day began to fail. Tea time had long gone by, and it seemed supper time would soon do the same. There were moths fluttering about, and the light became very dim, for the moon had not risen. Bilbo's pony began to stumble over roots and stones. They came to the edge of the steep fall in the ground so suddenly that Gandalf's horse nearly slipped down the slope. "Here it is at last," he called, and the others gathered round him and looked over the edge. They saw a valley far below. They could hear the voice of hurrying water in a rocky bed at the bottom. The scent of trees was in the air, and there was a light on the valley side across the water. Bilbo never forgot the way they slithered and slipped in the dusk down the steep zigzag path into the secret valley of Rivendell. The air grew warmer as they got lower, and the smell of the pine trees made him drowsy, so that every now and again he nodded and nearly fell off or bumped his nose on the pony's neck. Their spirits rose as they went down and down. The trees changed to beech and oak, and there was a comfortable feeling in the twilight. The last green had almost faded out of the grass, when they came at length to an open glade not far above the banks of the stream. "Humph! It smells like elves," thought Bilbo, as he looked up at the stars. They were burning bright, and the blue just then there came a burst of song like laughter in the trees. "Oh, what are you doing, and where are you going? Your ponies need shoeing, the river is flowing. Oh, tra-la-la-la-lally, here down in the valley. Oh, what are you seeking, and what are you making? The censered are reeking, the bannocks are baking. Oh, trill-lill-lill-a-lolly, the valley is jolly. Ha-ha. Oh, where are you going, with beards all a-wagging? No knowing, what brings Mr. Baggins and Ballin and Dwallin down into the valley in June, ha-ha. Oh, will you be staying, or will you be flying? Your ponies are straying, the daylight is dying. To fly would be folly, to stay would be jolly, and listen and hark till the end of the dark, to our tune, ha-ha." So they laughed and sang in the trees, and pretty fair nonsense, I dare say you think it. Not that they would care, they would only laugh all the more if you told them so. They were elves, of course. Soon Bilbo caught glimpses of them as the darkness deepened. He loved elves, though he seldom met them. But he was a little frightened of them too. Dwarves didn't get on well with them. Even decent enough dwarves like Thorin and his friends think them foolish, which is a very foolish thing to think. Or get annoyed with them, for some elves tease them and laugh at them, and most of all, at their beards. "Well, well," said a voice, "just look, Bilbo the Hobbit on a pony, my dear. Isn't it delicious? Most astonishing, wonderful." Then off they went into another song as ridiculous as the one I have written down in full. At last a tall young fellow, came out of the trees and bowed to Gandalf and to Thorin. "Welcome to the valley," he said. "Thank you," said Thorin, a bit gruffly, but Gandalf was already off his horse and among the elves, talking merrily with them. "You are a little out of your way," said the elf. "That is, if you are making for the only path across the water and to the house beyond. We will set you right, but you had best get on foot until you are over the bridge. Are you going to stay a bit and sing with us, or will you go straight on?" Excuse me, one moment. "Supper is preparing over there," he said. "I can smell the wood fires for the cooking." Tired as he was, Bilbo would have liked to stay a while. Elvish singing is not a thing to miss. In June, under the stars, not if you can care for such things. Also, he would have liked to have a few private words with these people that seemed to know his name and all about him, although he had never seen them before. He thought their opinions of his adventure might be interesting. Elves know a lot and are wondrous folk for news, and know what's going on among the peoples of the land, as quick as water flows, or quicker. But the dwarves were all for supper, and soon as possible just then, and would not stay. On they all went, leading their ponies till they were brought to a good path, and so at last to the very brink of the river. It was flowing fast and noisily as mountain streams do of a summer evening, when sun has been all day on the snow far up above. There was only a narrow bridge of stone without a parapet, as narrow as a pony could walk on, and over that they had to go slow and careful one by one, each leading his pony by the bridle. Bridle? Bridle. The elves had brought bright lanterns to the shore, and they sang a merry song as the party went across. "Don't dip your beard in the foam, father," they cried to Thorin, who was bent almost on his hands and knees. "It is nearly long enough without watering it." "Mind Bilbo doesn't eat all the cakes," they called. "He is too fat to get through the keyholes yet." "Hush, hush, good people, and good night," said Gandalf, who came last. "Valleys have ears, and some elves have over merry tongues. Good night." And so, at last, they all came to the last homely house, and found its doors flung wide open. Now, it is a strange thing, but things that are good to have, and days that are good to spend are soon told about, and not much to listen to. While things that are uncomfortable, palpitating, and even gruesome may make a good tale, and take a deal of telling anyway. They stayed long in that good house, 14 days. Wow. They stayed long in that good house, 14 days at least, and they found it hard to leave. Bilbo would gladly have stopped there forever and ever, even supposing a wish would have taken him right back to his hobbit hole without trouble. Yet there is little to tell about their stay. The master of the house was an elf friend, one of those people whose fathers came into the strange stories before the beginning of history, the wars of the evil goblins and the elves and the first men of the north. In those days of our tale, there were still some people who had both elves and heroes of the north for ancestors, and Elrond, the master of the house, was their chief. He was as noble and as fair in the face as an elf lord, as strong as a warrior, as wise as a wizard, as venerable as a king of dwarves, and as kind as summer. He comes into many tales, but his part in the story of Bilbo's great adventure is only a small one, though unimportant, as you will see, if we ever get to the end of it. His house was perfect whether you liked food, or sleep, or work, or storytelling, or singing, or just sitting and thinking best, or a pleasure mixture of all of them. Evil things did not come into the valley. I wish I had time to tell you even a few of the tales, or of one or two of the songs that they have heard in that house. All of them. The ponies as well grew refreshed and strong in a few days there. Their clothes were mended as well as their bruises, their tempers and their hopes. Their bags were filled with food and provisions light to carry but strong to bring them over the mountain passes. Their plans were improved with the best advice. So the time came to Midsummer Eve, and they were to go on again to the early sun on Midsummer morning. Elrond knew all about runes of every kind. That day he looked at the sword they had brought for him from the troll's lair, and he said, "Those are not troll make. They are old swords, very old swords, of the high elves of the west, my kin. They were made by Gondolin of the Goblin Wars. They must have come from a dragon's hoard or a goblin plunder, for dragons and the goblins destroyed that city many ages ago. This, Thorin, the rune's name as Orcrist, the Goblin Cleaver, in the ancient tongues of Gondolin. It was a famous blade. Just going to fix my posture and continue on. This Gandalf is Glamdring, Bowhammer, that the king of Gondolin once wore. Keep them well. Whence did the trolls get them, I wonder, said Thorin, looking at his sword with new interest. I could not say, said Elrond, but one may guess that your trolls had plundered others' plunder, or come on the remnants of old robberies in some hole in the mountains of old. I have heard that they are still forgotten treasures to be found in the deserted caverns in the mines of Moria, since the dwarf and goblin war. Thorin pondered these words. I will keep this sword in honor, he said. May it soon cleave goblins once again. A wish that is likely to be granted soon enough in the mountains, said Elrond, but show me now your map. He took it and gazed long at it, and he shook his head, for if he did not altogether approve of the dwarves and their love of gold, he hated dragons and their cruel wickedness, and he grieved to remember the ruin of the town of Dale and its merry bells, and the burnt banks of the bright river running. The moon was shining in a broad silver crescent. He held up his map, and the white light shone through it. What's this? He said. There are moon letters here, beside the plain runes which say, 5 feet high, the door, and 3 may walk abreast. What are moon letters? Asked the hobbit, full of excitement. He loved maps, as I have told you before. And he also liked runes and letters in cunning handwriting, though when he wrote himself, it was a bit thin and spidery. Moon letters are rune letters, but you cannot see them, said Elrond. Not when you look straight at them. They can only be seen when the moon shines behind them. And, what is more, with the more cunning sort, it must be a moon of the same shape and season of the day when they were written. The dwarves invented them and wrote them with silver pens, as your friends could tell you. There must have been written on Midsummer's Eve on a crescent moon, a long while ago. What do you say? Asked Gandalf and Thorin together, a bit vexed, perhaps, that even Elrond should have found this out first, though really they had not had a chance before, and there would not have been another until God knows when. Stand by the grey stone when the thrush knocks, reads Elrond, and the setting sun with the last light of Durin's day shall shine upon a keyhole. Durin, said Thorin. He was the fathers of the eldest race of dwarves, the Longbeards, and my first ancestor. I am his heir. Then what is Durin's day? Asked Elrond. The first day of the dwarves' new year, said Thorin, is, as all should know, as the first day in the last moon of autumn on the threshold of winter. We still call it Durin's day when the last moon of autumn and the sun are in the sky together. But this will not help us much, I fear, for it passes our skill in these days to guess when such a time will come again. That remains to be seen, said Gandalf. Is there any more writing? None to be seen by this moon, said Elrond, and he gave the map back to Thorin. And then they went down to the water to see the elves dance and sing upon the Midsummer's Eve. The next morning, it was Midsummer's morning, as fair and as fresh as could be dreamt. Blue sky and never a cloud, and the sun dancing on the water. Now they rode away amid songs of farewell and good speed, with their hearts ready for more adventure, and with a knowledge of the road they must follow over to the misty mountains and the land beyond. Chapter 4. Over the Hill and Under the Hill. There were many paths that led up those mountains, and many passes over them. Where am I? But most of the paths were cheats and deceptions that led nowhere or to bad ends, and most of the passes were infested by evil things with dreadful dangers. The dwarves and the hobbit, helped by the wise advice of Elrond and the knowledge and memory of Gandalf, took the right road to the right pass. Long days after they'd climbed out of the valley and left the last homely house miles behind, they were still going up and up and up. It was a hard path and a dangerous path, a crooked way and a lonely and long. Now they could look back over the lands they had left, laid out behind them far below, far, far away in the west, where things were blue and faint. Bilbo knew there lay his own country of safe and comfortable things, and in his little hobbit hole he shivered. It was getting bitter cold up here, and the winds came shrill among the rocks. Boulders, too, at times came galloping down the mountainsides, let loose by midday sun upon the snow, and passed among them, which was lucky, or over their heads, which was alarming. The nights were comfortable and chill, and they did not dare to sing or talk too loud, for the echoes were uncanny, and the silence seemed to dislike being broken, except by the noise of water, and the wail of wind, and the crack of stone. The summer is getting on down below, thought Bilbo, and haymaking is going on, and the picnics. They will be harvesting and blackberrying before we even begin to go down the other side at this rate. And the others were thinking equally gloomy thoughts, although when they had said goodbye to Elrond in the high hope of the midsummer morning, they had spoken gaily of passage of the mountains and of riding swift across the lands beyond. They had thought of coming to the secret door in the lonely mountain, perhaps that very first moon of autumn. And perhaps it will be Durin's day, they had said. Only Gandalf had shaken his head and said nothing. Dwarves had not passed that way for many years, but Gandalf had, and he knew how evil the danger had grown and thriven in the wild, since the dragons had driven men from the lands, and the goblins had spread in secret after the battle of the mines of Moria. Even the good plans of the wise wizards like Gandalf, and of the good friends like Elrond, go astray sometimes when you are off on dangerous adventures over the edge of the wild. That was a mouthful. And Gandalf was wise enough of a wizard to know it. He knew that something unexpected might happen, and he had hardly dared to hope that they might pass without fearful adventure over those great tall mountains with lonely peaks and valleys where no king ruled. They did not. All is well, until one day they met a thunderstorm. More than a thunderstorm, a thunder battle. You know how terrific a really big thunderstorm can be down in the land and in a river valley, especially at times when two great thunderstorms meet and clash. More terrible still are thunder and lightning in the mountains at night when storms come up from the east and west to make a war. The lightning splinters on the peaks, and rocks shiver, and great crashes split the air and go rolling and tumbling into every cave and hollow, and the darkness is filled with overwhelming noise and sudden light. Bilbo had never seen or imagined anything of the kind. They were high up in a narrow place, with a dreadful fall into a dim valley on one side of them. There they were sheltering, under a hanging rock for the night, and he lay beneath a blanket and shook from head to toe. When he peeped out in the lightning flashes, he saw, across the valley of stone, the giants were out. Oh, across the valley, the stone giants were out. That was a bad place for a gap in the sentence. They were hurling rocks at one another for a game, and catching them and tossing them down into the darkness, where they smashed among the trees far below, or splintered into little bits with a bang. Then came a wind and a rain, and the wind whipped the rain and the hail about in every direction, so that an overhanging rock was no protection at all. Soon they were getting drenched, and their ponies were standing with their heads down and their tails between their legs, and some of them were whinnying with fright. They could hear the giants guffawing and shouting all over the mountainsides. "This won't do at all," said Thorin. "If we don't get blown off or drowned or struck by lightning, we shall be picked up by some giant and kicked sky high for a football." football was invented by giants. Little known fact. Well, if you know of anywhere better to take us, then take us there, said Gandalf, who was feeling very grumpy, and was far from happy about the giants himself. The end of their argument was that they sent Fili and Kili to look for better shelter. They had very sharp eyes, and being the youngest of the dwarves, by some 50 years, they usually got these sorts of jobs, when everybody could see that it was absolutely no use sending Bilbo. There is nothing like looking if you want to find something, or so Thorin said to the young dwarves. You certainly usually find something if you look, but it is not always quite something you were after, so it proved on this occasion. Soon Fili and Kili came crawling back, holding on to the rocks of the wind. We have found a dry cave, they said, not far around the next corner, and ponies and all could get inside. Have you thoroughly explored it? The wizard, who knew that the caves up in these mountains were seldom unoccupied. Yes, they said, though everybody knew they could not have been long about it. They came back too quick. It isn't all that big, and it does not go that far back. That, of course, is the dangerous part about caves. You don't know how far back they go, sometimes, or where a passage behind may lead to, or what is waiting for you inside. But now Fili and Kili's news seemed good enough, so they all got up and prepared to move. The wind was howling and the thunder still growling, and they had a business getting themselves and their ponies along. Still, it was not very far to go, and before long they came to a big rock standing out into the path. If you stepped behind it, you found a low arch in the side of the mountain. There was a room to get the ponies through with a squeeze, when they had been unpacked and unsaddled. As they passed under the arch, it was good to hear the wind from the rain outside instead of all about them, and to feel safe from the giants and their rocks. But the wizard was taking no risks. He lit up his wand as he did that day in Bilbo's dining room that seemed so long ago, if you remember. And by its light, they explored the cave from end to end. It seemed quite a fair size, but not too large and mysterious. It had a dry floor and some comfortable nooks. At one end there was a room for the ponies, and there they stood, mighty glad of the change, steaming and champing in their nosebags. Oin and Gloin wanted to light a fire at the door to dry their clothes, but Gandalf would not hear of it, so they spread out their wet things on the floor and got dry ones out from their bundles. Then they made their blankets comfortable, got out their pipes, and blew smoke rings, which Gandalf turned into different colors and set dancing up by the roof to amuse them. They talked and forgot about the storm, and discussed what each would do with his share of the treasure when they got it, which, at the moment, did not seem so impossible. And so they drove off to sleep one by one, and that was the last time that they used the ponies, packages, baggages, tools, and paraphernalia that they had brought with them. It turned out a good thing that night that they had brought little Bilbo with them after all, for somehow he could not go to sleep for a long while, and when he did sleep, he had a very nasty dream. He dreamt that a crack in the wall at the back of the cave that got bigger and bigger and opened wider and wider, and he was very afraid, but could not call out or do anything but lie and look. Then he dreamt of the floor of the cave was giving away and he was slipping, beginning to fall down, goodness knows where to. At that he woke up at a horrible start and found that part of his dream was true. A crack had opened in the back of the cave, and there was already a wide passage. He was just in time to see the last of the ponies' tails disappearing into it. Of course, he gave out a very loud yell, as loud as hobbits can give, which is surprising for their size. Out jumped the goblins, big goblins, great ugly goblins, lots of goblins. Before you could say rocks and blocks, there was 6 to each dwarf, at least, and 2 even for Bilbo. And they were all grabbed and carried away through the crack before you could say tinder and flint, but not Gandalf. Bilbo's yell had done that much good. It had awakened him up wide in a splintered second, and when the goblins came to grab him, there was a terrific flash like lightning in the cave, a smell like gunpowder, and several of them fell dead. The crack closed with a snap, and Bilbo and the dwarves were on the wrong side of it. Where was Gandalf? Of that, neither they nor the goblins had any idea, and the goblins did not wait for them to find out. They seized Bilbo and the dwarves and hurried them along. It was deep, deep dark, such as only goblins that have taken to living in the heart of the mountains can see through. The passages there were crossed and tangled in all directions, but the goblins knew their way, as well as you do to the nearest post office. The book's dating itself. And the way went down, and it was most horribly stuffy. The goblins were very rough and pinched unmercifully and chuckled and laughed in their horrible stony voices, and Bilbo was more unhappy than ever when the troll had picked him up by his toes. He wished again and again for a nice bright hobbit hole, not for the last time. Excuse me. Now there came a glimmer of red light before them. The goblins began to sing, or croak, keeping time with the flap of their feet on the stone and shaking their prisoners as well. Just going to take a drink. Excuse me. Clap, snap, the black, crack, grip, grab, pinch, nab, and down, down to Goblin Town you go, my lad. Crack, clash, crush, smash, hammer and tongs, knocker and gongs, pound, pound, far underground, ho, ho, my lad. Swish, smack, whip, crack, batter and beat, yammer and bleat, work, work, not dare to shirk, while goblins quaff and goblins laugh, round and round, far underground, below, my lad. It sounded truly terrifying. The walls echoed with the clap and snap, and the crush and smash, and the ugly laughter of their ho, ho, my lad. The general meaning of the song was only too plain, for now the goblins took out whips and whipped them with a swish and smack, and set them running as fast as they could in front of them, and more than one of the dwarves were already yammering and bleating like anything when they stumbled into a big cavern. It was lit by a great red fire in the middle, and by torches along the walls, and it was full of goblins. They all laughed and stamped and clapped their heads when the dwarves, with poor Bilbo at the back of the nearest to the whips, came running in, while the goblin drivers whooped and cracked their whips behind. The ponies were already there, huddled in the corner, and there were all the bags and packages lying broken open and being rummaged by goblins, and smelt by goblins, and fingered by goblins, and quarreled over by goblins. I am afraid that this was the last they ever saw of those excellent little ponies, including a jolly sturdy little white fellow that Elrond had lent to Gandalf, since his horse was not suitable for the mountain paths. For goblins eat horses and ponies and donkeys, and other much more dreadful things. And they are always hungry. Just now, however, the prisoners were thinking only of themselves. The goblins chained their hands behind their backs and linked them all together in a line and dragged them to the far end of the cavern, with little Bilbo tugging at the end of the row. There, in the shadows, on a large flat stone, sat a tremendous goblin with a huge head, and armed goblins were standing round him carrying the axe and the bent swords that they use. Now, goblins are cruel, wicked, and bad-hearted. They make no beautiful things, but they make many clever ones. They can tunnel and mine as well as any, but the most skilled dwarves. When they take the trouble, though, they are usually untidy and dirty. Hammers, axes, swords, daggers, pickaxes, tongs, and also instruments of torture, they make very well, or get other people to make them to their designs. Prisoners and slaves that have to work till they die for want of air and light. It is not unlikely that they invented some of the machines that have since troubled the world, especially the ingenious devices for killing large numbers of people at once. For wheels and engines and explosions always delighted them, and also not working with their own hands more than they could help. But in those days, and in those wild parts, they had not advanced, as it is called, so far. They did not hate dwarves especially, no more than they hated everybody and everything, and particularly the orderly and prosperous. In some parts, wicked dwarves had even made alliances with them. But they had a special grudge against Thorin's people, because of the war which you have heard mentioned, but which did not come into this tale. And anyway, goblins don't care for who they catch, as long as it is done smart and secret, and the prisoners are not able to defend themselves. "Who are these miserable persons?" said the great goblin. "Dwarves, and this," said one of the drivers, pulling at Bilbo's chain so that he fell forward onto his knees. "We found them sheltering in our front porch." "What do you mean by it?" said the great goblin, turning up to Thorin. "Up to no good, I'll warrant, spying on the private business of my people, I guess. Thieves, I shouldn't be surprised to learn. Murderers and friends of elves, not unlikely. Come, what have you got to say?" "Thorin the dwarf at your service," he replied. "It was merely a polite nothing. Of the things which you suspect and imagine we had no idea at all. We sheltered from a storm in what seemed like a convenient cave and unused. Nothing was further from our thoughts than inconveniencing goblins in any way whatever. That was true enough." Said the great goblin, "so you say. But I may ask what you're doing up in the mountains at all, and where you were coming from, and where you were going to. In fact, I should like to know all about you. Not that it would do you much good, Thorin Oakenshield. I know too much about your folk already, but let's have the truth, and I will prepare something particularly uncomfortable for you." "We were on a journey to visit our relatives, our nephews, and nieces, and first, second, and third cousins, and the other descendants of our grandfathers who live on the east side of these truly hospitable mountains," said Thorin, not quite knowing what to say all at once in a moment, when obviously the exact truth would not do at all. "He is a liar, O truly tremendous one," said one of the drivers. "Several of our people were struck by lightning in the cave when we invited these creatures to come below, and they are as dead as stones. Also, he has not explained this." He held out the sword which Thorin had worn, a sword which came from the troll's lair. The great goblin gave a truly awful howl of rage when he looked at it, and all his soldiers gnashed their teeth, clashed their shields, and stamped. They knew the sword at once. It had killed hundreds of goblins in its time, when the fair elves of Gondolin hunted them to the hills or did battle before their walls. They had called it Orcrist, goblin cleaver, but the goblins simply called it biter. They hated it, and hated it worse than anyone who carried it. "Murderers and elf friends," the great goblin shouted. "Slash them, beat them, bite them, gnash them, take them away and to dark holes full of snakes, and never let them see the light again." He was in such a rage that he jumped off his seat and himself rushed at Thorin with his mouth open. Just at that moment, all the lights in the cavern went out, and their great fire went off, poof, into a tower of blue glowing smoke, right up to the roof, that scattered piercing white sparks all over the goblins. The yells and yammering, croaking, gibbering and jabbering, howls, growls, and curses, shrieking and striking that followed were beyond description. That was actually a pretty good description. Several hundred wild cats and wolves began being roasted slowly alive together would not have compared with it. That was also a pretty good description. The sparks were burning holes in the goblins, and the smoke was now fell from the roof, made the air thick for even their eyes to see through. Soon they were falling over one another and rolling in heaps on the floor, biting and kicking and fighting as if they had all gone mad. Suddenly, a sword flashed in its own light. Bilbo saw it go right through the great goblin as he stood dumbfounded in the middle of his rage. He fell dead, and the goblin soldiers fled before the sword, shrieking into the darkness. The sword went back into its sheath. "Follow me, quick," said a voice, fierce and quiet. But before Bilbo understood what had happened, he was trotting along again, as fast as he could trot, at the end of the line, down more dark passages, with the yells of Goblin Hall growing fainter behind him, a pale light leading them on. "Quicker, quicker," said the voice. "The torches will soon be relit." "Half a minute," said Dory, who was at the back next to Bilbo, and a decent fellow. He made the hobbit scramble on his shoulders as best he could with his tied hands, and then off they all went at a run, with a clink-clink of chains, and many a stumble, since they had no hands to steady themselves with. Not for a long while did they stop, and by that time they must have been right down the very mountain's heart. Then Gandalf lit up his wand. Of course it was Gandalf. But just then they were too busy to ask how he had gotten there. He took out his sword again, and again it flashed in the dark by itself. It burnt with a rage that made it gleam if goblins were about. Now it was bright as a blue flame for delight in the killing of the great lord of the cave. It made no trouble whatever of cutting through the goblins' chains and setting the prisoners free as quickly as possible. This sword's name was Glamdring, the foe hammer, if you remember. The goblins just called it Beater. They hated it worse than Biter, if possible. Orcrist, too, had been saved, for Gandalf had brought it along as well, snatching it from one of the terrified guards. Gandalf thought of most things, and though he could not do everything, he could do a great deal for his friends in a tight corner. "Are we all here?" said he, handing his sword back to Thorin with a bow. "Let me see. 1, there, that's Thorin. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Where are Fili and Kili? Here they are. 12, 13, and here's Mr. Baggins, 14. Well, it might be worse, and then again it might have been a good deal better. No ponies and no food, and no knowing quite where we are. And hordes of angry goblins just behind. On we go." And on they went. Gandalf was quite right. They began to hear goblin noises and horrible cries behind the passages they had just come through, and sent them on faster than ever, and as Bilbo could not possibly go half as fast, for dwarves can roll along at tremendous pace, I can tell you, when they have to, they took it all in turn to carry him on their backs. Still, goblins go faster than dwarves, and these goblins knew the way better. They had made the paths themselves, and were madly angry, so that do what they could, the dwarves heard the cries and howls getting closer and closer. Soon they could hear even the flap of the goblins' feet, many, many feet, which seemed only just round the last corner. The blink of red torches could be seen behind them in the tunnel. They were following, and they were getting deadly tired. "Why, oh why, did I ever leave my hobbit hole?" the poor Mr. Baggins bumping up and down on Bomber's back. "Why, oh why, did I ever bring a wretched little hobbit on a treasure hunt?" said poor Bomber, who was fat and staggered with the sweat dripping down his nose in his heat and terror. At this point, Gandalf fell behind, and Thorin with him. They took a sharp corner. "About turn," he shouted. "Draw your sword, Thorin." There was nothing else to be done, and the goblins did not like it. They came scurrying round the corner in a full cry, and found Goblin Cleaver and Foe Hammer shining cold and bright right in their astonished eyes. The ones in front dropped their torches and gave one yell before they were killed. The ones behind yelled still more, and leapt back over those that were running after them. "Bite her and beat her," they shrieked, and soon they were all in confusion, and most of them were hustling back the way they had come. It was quite a long while before any of them dared to turn the corner. By the time the dwarves had gone on again a long, long way on into the dark of the tunnels of the goblins' realm. When the goblins discovered that, They put out their torches, and they slipped on soft shoes, and they chose out their very quickest runners with the sharpest ears and eyes. These ran forward as swift as weasels in the dark, with hardly any more noises than bats. That is why neither Bilbo nor the dwarves, nor even Gandalf heard them coming, nor did they see them. But they were seen by the goblins that ran silently behind them, for Gandalf was letting his wand give out a faint light to help the dwarves as they went along. Quite suddenly, Dori, now at the back again carrying Bilbo, was grabbed from behind in the dark. He shouted and fell, and the hobbit rolled off his shoulders into the blackness, bumping his head on a rock and remembering nothing more.